Let's talk about the basics of Python function definitions for a minute. If you want to write a new function in Python, the way that you do that is with the def statement. So you might make a function like def greeting, takes in a name, and then prints out a message like hello name. This will give you a function that you can use over and over again in your program. So you could say greeting Guido, and it would say hello Guido. Or you could say greeting Paula, and it would say hello Paula. If you want to write a function that returns a result, you do the same sort of thing. Like maybe I have an add function that carries out some calculation. If I want to return a result back, you use the return statement. So this will give you a function that carries out some calculation, but it gives you the option of saving the calculation. So I could say a is equal to add 4, 5, and then a would get 9. Few critical details about functions. First of all, if you write a function, any variable that gets created in that function, including the arguments or result, is entirely private to that function. So if I'm sitting outside, there are no variables x and y defined right now. Essentially, everything that happens in a function stays inside the function. Python behaves like other programming languages in that respect. Another thing about functions that I'll mention, there are a couple of different ways of calling a function. So here, what I've done is I've called add, and I've provided just the inputs in the order listed. Like 4 is going to be the x, 5 is going to be the y. If you happen to know the names of the arguments, you can also name them. So I could say things like add x is 10, y is 15, and that will do the same thing. This is known as keyword argument passing, by the way. One of the things that you can do if you name the arguments is switch the order up. And you don't really have to worry about screwing it up. If you specify the arguments in kind of the wrong way, Python will give you an error. For instance, if I were to say add with 5 and then later say x is 10, for instance, I would get an error saying, what are you doing? You gave me 2 different values for x. So a couple of different ways of calling a function. And then a final thing with functions that I'll mention, it is quite common for a function to include a string as the first argument. You'll sometimes see somebody define a string that has some descriptive comment of some kind, like issues a greeting, for instance. What that is that's something known as a documentation string, and it feeds Python's help command. So if you perform a help on that function, you'll see that string that you define there. So these are some of the basics of getting started with functions. The next section, we're going to use functions to improve some of the data processing code that we wrote earlier.